In Revelation chapter 13, we read, "He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell, except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name."
We are told that the final method of exchange will not be with money, but will be done with an assigned mark that is put upon the right hand or the forehead of a person. Now with modern technology, not only do we see this as a potential, it is happening today.
It's interesting that in our day and age, there is a technology emerging that Hitler or Stalin or any world dictator would dream of, and that is the electronic mechanisms by which one can control all commerce within a nation or perhaps even the whole world by cashless transactions with barcodes, with implantable chips and what have you.
Just recently I took my cat to the vet for a surgical operation, and the vet asked me if I would be interested in having him identified by having a silicon chip implanted in the tissue of his flesh. All of these things that are happening technologically fit into what the scriptures say will take place in the last days, when no man, woman, or child will be able to buy or sell unless they have a particular mark. Is it possible that an identification chip implanted in the tissues of the flesh could be the means that will be used?
People often wonder, are we really in the last days? I mean, what is this talk about, the last days? There are a number of signs that the Bible gives that really identify our generation as the first one that you could say is in the last of the last days. This thing is about to wind up. One of them we find in Revelation 13, where the Bible says a man will arise who will control the world. Now you've got to have a lot of technology to control the world, and part of what he controls is all banking and commerce. You couldn't have done this in the past. You couldn't have even imagined doing this in the past. And somebody's coming, and he's going to control the world, all banking and all commerce, and we have the technology to do it today, technology that was never even dreamed of in the past.
Jesus, speaking of the last days, said, "And this gospel will be preached in all the world, as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come." When we consider that 2,000 years ago, many nations, including the Americas, were not yet discovered, it is remarkable that Jesus made such a shocking declaration. Only since the 1980s has the fulfillment of this prophecy been possible. Through the deployment of global communication satellites and other communication technology, the gospel is indeed being preached to every nation.
It is interesting in the book of Revelation how John saw an angel flying through the midst of the heaven, having the everlasting gospel. And he is proclaiming this gospel to all the world. Now, it isn't too far-fetched to look at the satellite network that we have established for worldwide communication and realize now that we can communicate worldwide through these satellites that are flying through the midst of heaven, whereby a man who controlled the world could guide and govern the activities of the world, as well as the gospel being preached to all nations and to all people through these satellite networks. It is interesting that the Bible tells us that there will be 2 witnesses that God will send, and they will be slain in Jerusalem, and the whole world will see their bodies lying in the streets of Jerusalem. This again would have been an impossibility if we had not had the worldwide communication systems through satellites, where an event can happen in Jerusalem and we can be sitting in our living rooms and watching that event take place. And yet the prophecy, as far-fetched as it seemed, is now a very practical reality.
There are just so many prophecies about the last days that nobody could have dreamed of. And one of them in Revelation 13, it says this false prophet will come along, the second man, the assistant to the Antichrist, who backs him and who does miracles and so forth. And one of the things that he does, he sets up an image to the beast, and he makes this image talk. Again, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, you couldn't have dreamed how that might happen. But today we have a whole science of robotics that is developing so rapidly. I mean, I've talked with some of these people, and it's mind-boggling what they're able to do. But to even dream this up 2,000 years ago, no, that's prophecy. We're seeing it fulfilled. This is God inspiring men to write these things.
In Revelation chapter 13, verse 15, we read, "He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed." It is this generation that has witnessed the birth of human-like robots, bionics, and genetic engineering. Many religions already worship images, and Hollywood has paved the way for our acceptance of human-like machines. So we see that the technology exists today, and that our society is being conditioned to worship human-like images.
Jesus gave his disciples a confidential briefing on his second coming, which is recorded in Matthew 24. And in that briefing, he pointed out that there would come great tribulation, such as the world had not seen to that time nor ever would see again. In fact, he said, unless those days be shortened, there would no flesh be saved. It's interesting, the technology to make good that prediction didn't exist until our day. If you talked in these terms in the period of the Roman Empire, or if you talked in these terms, say, even in the time of the Civil War, the technology to wipe out the entire world just wasn't a realistic projection. And yet today, our technology has caught up to those prophecies. Every political leader on the planet Earth makes his decisions under the cloud of the possibility of triggering a global nuclear war that could indeed destroy all flesh on the planet Earth.
This is Zechariah 14:12, written 2,500 years ago by the prophet Zechariah. Quote, "Their flesh shall dissolve while they stand on their feet. Their eyes shall dissolve in their sockets, and their tongues shall dissolve in their mouths." Unquote. I mean, what is he talking about? You couldn't have imagined it 2,500 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago. This has got to be nuclear weapons. This is exactly what nuclear weapons do. You know what's happening in the Middle East. Arafat makes no bones about it. This is not peace. This is another way of waging war. Get some territory inside Israel to destroy them, affect the ultimate conclusion, Hitler's final solution, wipe them out. Daniel 8 verse 20 says of the Antichrist, through peace he will destroy many. And finally, he will lead the armies of the world against Israel, and Israel is not going to go down in flames without using their ultimate weapon. They have nuclear weapons, we all know that, and they're going to use them. A nuclear exchange will begin in the Middle East. This is exactly what Zechariah 14:12 is talking about. I don't think you can doubt it.
When I had an inside briefing at NATO headquarters in Brussels, our ambassador to NATO and our Assistant Secretary of Defense for NATO admitted they believe a nuclear event in the Middle East is a certainty. It's just a matter of time.
The Bible predicts the moral state of mankind at the end of the age. Are we witnessing these very things?
Jesus said in Matthew 24, verses 4 and 5, that in the last days many would come in his name, proclaiming that they were the Christ, and would deceive many. As I've traveled around the world in the past several years, I've actually encountered people who are following leaders who proclaim that they are the Christ. And this is not just happening in one or two countries, this is happening worldwide. For example, while I was speaking in Moscow, an individual jumped up, interrupted the meeting, and said that what I was telling them about the Bible wasn't true, that they were following the Messiah, the true Messiah, and what he was telling them was the truth, and that the people should follow that message rather than the Bible.
There was an itinerant preacher, ex-carpenter, had never been outside of the little tiny country of Israel, and he dared to say, in the last days, many will come in my name. They're not going to call themselves Buddha. They're not going to call themselves Confucius. They're going to call themselves the Christ. That was pretty audacious. And yet we've got all kinds of people today who claim to be Jesus Christ.
I'm God.
You people that interviewed this gentleman today, I don't think you knew who you interviewed, but you interviewed God.
Their lives cut short by a madman claiming to be